Hello and welcome to Ask MotorInc. A couple of weeks ago on the Independence Day weekend, I had such a great ride. I got to ride one of my motorcycles down to Chennai. Then I had 2 days on my other motorcycle at the track, teaching people how to ride a little bit better and therefore a little bit faster and safer. And then I got to ride that bike back. And yeah, it's a few weeks later, and I'm still on such a high that I'm extra happy to do Ask MotorInc today. And we have, as usual, some very, very good questions. The first question is from SG. Their first question is motoring for iPad. We are working on large screen support. You will see them being rolled out shortly. The second question is a hypothetical question. It's a very interesting question. He says, if you have two bikes where everything except the suspension setup is exactly the same, which setup will cause more wear on the tires? Soft suspension, medium suspension, or stiff suspension? They understand that handling and comfort might change, but just the balance of handling, comfort, wear, and tear. And the answer to this is it depends on your riding style a lot more than the suspension and the tires themselves. The harder you ride, the more you consume the tires to be able to ride harder. That means you're opening the throttle harder, which means the tire has to work harder to deliver that torque to the ground. And to me, the primary wear and tear on the tire will come from how you're riding the motorcycle a lot more than it will come from how stiff the suspension is or how soft the suspension is. So the right way to think about this is if you want to extend the life of your tires, you have to be gentler with the throttle, and the stiffness of the suspension will not make much of a difference. Since I was at the racetrack, I can give you an example of this. It turns out that I had an insecurity about how smooth I was as a motorcyclist very early on in my career. It's an insecurity that has stayed with me for a long time. And in trying to solve that, I have become an exceptionally smooth rider. So when I ride a really soft tire, like a slick tire or a top of the line sports tire, at the racetrack where wear levels can be quite high, I generally don't seem to wear out my tires very quickly. And this is consistent across a whole bunch of tires, although the suspension setup remains very, very similar to what it is right now. And to me, the primary wear which a similarly weighted rider would create is by being more aggressive with the throttle, and the suspension setup would affect them a lot less in terms of tire wear. The second question also has two very interesting ideas in there. And it says he has his Mamaji's Classic 350. It feels really underpowered to him, and therefore he ends up at max RPM a lot. Daily commute is 50 kilometers, mostly highway. So should he service it and return it to his Mamaji, or should he say, I'm responsible for this and buy the motorcycle off him because there might be long-term damage? Now, the real answer to this is the idea that a modern motorcycle, this is assuming this is the J Series Classic 350, the idea that a modern motorcycle could be damaged by high RPM usage is actually a little bit of a false idea. Motorcycles are built very robustly today, including the Royal Enfields, and damaging an engine like that is very, very hard to do. To give you an example, we have motorcycles at the racetrack that we use over and over again. And one of the things we do is in the early parts of the drills where we are practicing a specific skill, you're not allowed to change gears. And that means these motorcycles sit at redline for a really long time down the straights, and it doesn't seem to affect their longevity. So the idea that you're being unkind to the motorcycle may be true, but is that actually causing long-term damage? I would be very surprised. Motorcycles today basically need their fluids to be topped up and service to be on time, etc. And if you do that, the fundamental reliability doesn't change based on how low revs you use or how high revs you use. In fact, if you don't use a motorcycle enough, you could probably cause more long-term damage because the plastic parts don't work so well after that. The second question is the one that he didn't ask actually is underpowered max RPM usage. It's tempting to think that the 350 isn't going, so I'll just use more and more and more of the throttle. But the Classic 350 was designed to produce torque and not horsepower. So actually you're wasting your time. This motorcycle would behave a lot better if you just use maximum torque instead. It would be quicker, it would be smoother, it would give you better fuel efficiency. But it might feel a little bit boring. And to me, what this says is there is a mismatch in how you ride motorcycles and what the Classic 350 does. So to me, the right solution to this is return the motorcycle to Mamaji and say, thank you for the experience, and then get a motorcycle that works better in the high revs where you clearly like to ride. The next question is from I Cool to Die, and he says, is it better to ride the Duke 250 at like 5,000 RPM all the time, even in first and second gear? Honestly, current day motorcycles don't really get affected a lot, especially over the long term on riding 5,000 RPM or 3,000 RPM or 7,000 RPM. But in the first and second gear, where the gearing is really short, you could just be wasting your time. So to me, if I had a Duke 250, is there a problem riding 4-5,000 RPM in first and second gear? Honestly, no. But it is noisy. It's a rough way to ride a motorcycle, and you're not gaining a lot from doing this. Once you get to the higher gears, the ideal way to ride a motorcycle is to stay as close to the torque peak as you can. And if you want to go really quickly and efficiently, between the torque peak and the horsepower peak is usually where the sweet spot is. So on a Duke 250, I simply wouldn't bother. I'd change up. This is a pretty linear motorcycle. It doesn't really have a power band as such. So you'll make forward progress whether you use 3,000 RPM or 5,000 RPM. So to me, there's nothing wrong with riding it like this, but you're not gaining anything from it really. So the next question is from Firoz Al Farouk, and he says, two-wheelers in general act funny when you go on top of gravel. Is slowing down the only option when your bike goes on gravel? And two, if you assume that you're on a highway taking a turn and suddenly there's gravel and the bike starts to get the temperament of a house, his words, not mine, what could I do to bring it under control? And is there any way it is possible to make a turn on top of gravel? Now, first, the thing about going off road that I'm beginning to understand is that as intuitive as you think motorcycles are, they generally are counterintuitive. And on gravel, slowing down will make the movement of the front end a little bit more scary, although you will think you're more in control. And the trick actually is to maintain your speed so that the front actually has more momentum and therefore it's deflected off its path by the gravel a little bit less. So if you slow down before the gravel, you can get a small advantage from it. But once you're on top of the gravel, slowing down usually does not help. And the second question, you're on the turn and you suddenly see gravel in the middle of the road. I would question how far ahead of the motorcycle were you looking and what actions that distance that you looked at caused you to take, because it sounds like you weren't looking far enough ahead. To me, if I'm on a road that I know well, I still, on a public road, would not commit too much to it. On a racetrack, I would commit all the way to it, especially for known corners. But on a public road where situations can change, there could be a corner that was very clean last night, but today morning on your commute, somebody's dropped diesel in the middle of that corner. There could be gravel, there could be water, whatever. I would simply not commit so much. And what that means is, until I can see the exit, my throttle does not come on. And if that means I enter slower into a corner, that's okay. What I want to gain in terms of speed is to come out of the corner faster, which is actually the more efficient and the safer way to ride. Because remember, you're at your biggest risk when you're turning into the corner. This is the part where Firoz seems to be committing to a corner before he's seen all the way through. Now, if you do come through a corner and suddenly realize there's gravel, your basic option is to stay where you are and hope that the motorcycle carries you through without causing significant movement. Now, you can't really brake once you're on top of the gravel because the traction is shifting. If you have the opportunity to go around the gravel, that might be an option. But if that's not an option, you basically have to ride it through. What I would do is I would come around the corner, discover the gravel, and basically stand the motorcycle up as much as possible and then give no inputs while I pass through the gravel and then resume turning as much as needed after that. That means steady speed, not any major change of direction. You just basically ride it through. That's all you can do. But the key issue here is, are you looking far enough ahead? And if you can't see through the corner, you shouldn't be committing to the corner, not on a public road. Himanshu has a very cool question, and you'll see the photograph and I will describe what he's saying. He's been using this setup for 300 kilometers now. It's a bit unconventional because if you see at the back of the motorcycle, he's got what look like Viaterra's pod tailbags, but he's mounted them vertically beside the rear wheel and above the exhaust. And he's saying it fits quite well into the Ronin's pannier mounts, and he has one bag on each side. How stable do you think this setup is, and should he be rethinking this or not? And the easy answer to this is manufacturers sometimes design bags to be mounted horizontally, for example the Viaterra pods, and he's mounted them vertically, and in theory they could sag a little bit if the straps aren't tightened enough. But in the photograph the straps look tight and therefore he should be okay. The only thing I would check, and that's because I can't see it clearly in this photograph, is whether there is enough clearance between the bag and the exhaust so that there is no chance that on the right side of the bike the exhaust could cause the bag to burn. A solution that I have used in the past quite successfully is you buy a really thin cutting board like the ones that you use for your kitchen. You cut it to size and then you insert it at the back of the bag before you mount the bag. It gives it a little bit of structure and makes vertically mounting the bag a little bit simpler. But heavy bags mounted next to the wheel is actually a very good idea. It creates a very stable setup for the motorcycle as long as the bags don't move and the mounting stays secure. On motorcycles with side-mounted exhaust, the only other thing you have to be cautious of is the distance between the exhaust and the bag so that you couldn't burn them accidentally. That's it. This is a good idea. HP Chandan asks, what's your opinion on the gear shift lever, which is half the length now when compared to earlier days and mostly operated by the toe? And the same is being adopted for most of the motorcycle manufacturers, even for the commuter category too. Well, in all honesty, the heel shifter has been a part of some cruisers at some point, but largely most motorcycles in the world do only give you the toe lever, and that's just how it is. I've ridden a whole bunch of motorcycles with just the toe shifter. It's how I prefer to shift. I will only ever use the heel shifter if the design of the shifter is such that when I try to use the toe, the heel gets in my way, like it happened just now on the Hero Glamour X. I ended up heel shifting for upshifts only because I couldn't successfully get my toe under the lever and then not have my heel mess with the other part of the shifter. I have had long-term bikes with the full shifter where I've gone to a mechanic and said, take a hacksaw and remove the heel part completely off. But this is a personal preference thing. The thing is, if you do prefer the heel shifter, you're not going to find a lot of them. Toe shifting is how 99% of all the motorcycles on earth work, and I think they work just fine. And the last question is from Mihir Vasani 007. I recognize Mihir's name because he's absolutely a regular on MotorInc from the first days on YouTube and now on the app. And he's saying, one, does anyone have updates on the CB750 Hornet in India? I believe it has been launched. Should we expect motoring first and then FAQs? Honestly, not yet. A, Honda doesn't really do media bikes, and B, we are not convinced that our current formats deal with big bikes the way they should be. We're working on this. When we figure it out, you'll see something. The second question is a very, very, very common question. How do you tackle mid-corner bumps when taking a corner leaned over? One, maybe you shouldn't commit to a corner before you've seen all the way through, which means entering slower, which can feel boring, but that is the safer and quicker way to do it. So you open the throttle once you can see all the way through. Two, the reason why mid-corner bumps can cause more upset than hitting them when you're vertically upright is you have less suspension to deal with, because once your front forks are like this, the amount of absorption is still like this, and therefore the amount of movement component they have left at the lean angle is less than before. But honestly, you don't really encounter such severe mid-corner bumps, nor do you take such severe lean angles on public roads that this is going to be a major issue. So in most of the cases, if you just do nothing, it will feel uncomfortable, but the bike will usually handle it. And this is how almost all of the motorcycles I can think of will operate. But the primary solution to this is to not commit to corners until you can see all the way through them. And if that means your entries slow down further, that's the right way to do it on a public road. At the racetrack, because you can go over the same bumps over and over and over again, you quickly find a sense of peace. And to give you an example, my Tuono's at the racetrack only, it's set up for the racetrack, and in Chennai between turns 3 and 4 is a set of kinks, and the right edge of the kinks is really bumpy. So it does really upset the Tuono, but having done that over and over again, I realize that it feels bad to me, but the bike doesn't lose its line, it doesn't really lose contact with the ground, and my ability to transfer power to the ground doesn't fundamentally change. And I'm making a right to left transition over the bumps, and that doesn't seem to affect the motorcycle's accuracy as much as I'm moving up and down in the saddle. So I've just learned to ignore it. So A, mid-corner bumps can feel worse than they are. Two, most motorcycles will usually pull through. You don't actually have to do much. And three, if you're hitting mid-corner bumps and getting surprised, the real problem is you entered too fast and you committed to the corner before you understood the full nature of the corner. And that's a big issue, and you should be working on that. Now, we've had two skill-related questions and a couple of other questions. And what I love about Circles is the variety of questions that are coming at us. The only questions we won't take on these videos are, should I buy this bike or that? And the reason for that is, to me, that is a one-to-one conversation, because we need to understand who you are, what your preferences are, before you can recommend something to you. But if you have any other questions at all, come to Motoring Circles. It's completely free. Use the hashtag AskMotoring and we'll get right on it. And you will be surprised at the depth and profound knowledge that MotorInc fam brings to that table. In some cases, they will also reveal common issues like this committing to the corner too early thing, which a lot of people do and haven't realized is a riding error, and we can then jump in and solve it for a whole bunch of people in one go. Use our search engine. It's awesome. Somebody might have asked the question you have already, and there might be answers there waiting for you already. All of this is happening on the MotorInc app, which is free to download on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. I invite you to try it. And now I'm going back out to ride some more motorcycles. I will see you next time on Ask MotorInc.